Week 12 of the fantasy football season. Here's a few defense DST units I looked at off the wire this week. The first one, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So the Bucs you actually could get off the waiver wire this week, available in 89% of fantasy leagues. And like I said, they had the bye week this week, and they're available right now to pick up before the Monday night game. So they got a great matchup coming up at the New York Giants. Give up the fourth most fantasy points to DSTs on the season. So they're obviously a streaming option. And I think it's going to be Drew Lock most likely. Well, obviously, Tommy DeVito in there, quarterback for this New York Giant team. So, like I said, Daniel Jones, he's been a train wreck all season. But even if it's DeVito or Drew Lock, I think this defense could go out there and make some plays. I know their secondary's been bad all season long, but now coming off the bye, getting a little bit healthier, I think Tampa Bay, as a one-week streaming use, could be a decent ad this week. Next DST, the Chicago Bears out there in 50% of fantasy leagues, just making the list this week. In Week 11, obviously a tough matchup where they weren't going to put points on the board, but Week 12, middle-of-the-pack matchup versus the Minnesota Vikings, but they do give up the 10th most fantasy points to DSTs on the season. In Chicago, the last few weeks, Week 9 at Arizona, 27 points allowed, 3 sacks, 2 fumble recoveries. Week 10 versus the Pats, 19 points allowed, a sack, and an interception. And Week 11 versus Green Bay, like I said, they didn't do much in that game. 20 points allowed in that one, a sack and interception. So Minnesota, I know they got a good offense, but they do turn the football over. And you don't know week in and week out what Sam Darnold is going to show up. So it's a home game for Chicago. Tough for these opponents to come in and play at Soldier Field. The great atmosphere for a home game for Chicago, obviously, where they got the crowd behind them. And I think this week it's a tough matchup for Darnold. Could turn the football over a few times. I believe in this game. So if you need a defense, the Bears are out there at 50% of fantasy leagues. Next DST is the Washington Commanders. So the Commanders DST, I know they haven't been a great unit, but this week a good matchup versus the Dallas Cowboys. Their offense obviously all banged up. Dak Prescott out for the season. Cooper Rush in quarterback. Running back, they'll finally name the full-time running back for this Cowboy team. After Elliott, he hasn't done much all season long. And the CeeDee Lamb banged up with the back. So with all those factors and the Commanders and offense that put up a lot of points on the board, and I believe this week they will versus Dallas Cowboy team. That'll make the Cowboys one-dimensional, obviously, and Commanders defense could tee you off, especially in a home game. So I know the defense hasn't played well, but it's a one-week streaming option versus the Cowboys. I give up the 8th most fantasy points to DSTs on the season. I like them this week. In the final DST I like to head off the wire is the Arizona Cardinals. I know this Cardinal team, it's not a great matchup on paper, obviously, versus a pretty good offense in the Seattle Seahawks. But this Seattle Seahawk offense has had some turnovers, and Geno Smith's taken some big sacks this season. So Arizona right now available in tons of fantasy leagues, 96% of leagues. In the last couple weeks before they went on bye, they went out there and played good games. Week 9 versus Chicago, 9 points allowed, 6 sacks of safety. Week 10 versus the Jets, 6 points allowed, 3 sacks of fumble recovery. So I know those offenses aren't all that great, even though the Jets on paper have Aaron Rodgers, Garrett Wilson, Devontae Adams, Breece Hall, and Arizona held them down, no doubt about it. But I believe this week at Seattle, they could create some havoc in a division game, and you know anything goes in those ball games. And Seattle, believe it or not, does give up the 5th most fantasy points to DSTs on the season. This week, I think Arizona as a streaming option. The last 2 games, they played good football. No doubt about it, was this Arizona defense. There and there this week is a streaming option. So that's a few defense DST units I looked at off the wire for Week 12 of the fantasy football season.